Well, hello, my lovelies. Whether you're joining me live on Twitch, the archive on YouTube, or the podcast on your favorite podcast streaming platform. Oh, it's a class warfare report. Oh, yeah. Broadcast is 07142020. You know what it do to Poordom Rebel, Andrew, myself. Broadcasting outward into a screaming abyss. Most people assume that's, the abyss is nothing, but we know better than that at this point. I want to thank anybody joining me here. I brought specific content to get into. I hope to get into two things on the podcast specifically, and then I might have to continue on the intellectual dark web, which I started yesterday. It's a video that I started with yesterday's broadcast. And I may have to continue that on just Twitch and YouTube because my streaming platform, or Anchor, no, not Anchor, but my conversion for audio only allows a certain amount of gigs. So I got to work with what I got. So the podcasts are always going to be shorter if I happen to go on longer. But this may or may not turn out that way just because I wanted to read an article, watch an interview, and then see more about that intellectual dark web because I was getting a bit interested in hearing all of their ideas and how wrong they were. And kind of breaking them apart like old watches or old radios. So thank you for joining me on the Poordom Rebel Radio. I know it's probably still a working class observation, but it'll always be a working class observation. But I know that Poordom Rebellion Radio is the main outlet for me. But let's get into this Bloomberg article that I saw. It was trending, I believe, on Twitter. Didn't get to read the full thing, but I am very interested in the subject of power and where it resides, and then also class warfare because I acknowledge that it exists, and I hope that you do too. But I definitely want to stay on top of historic market volatility. Oh. Yeah, they want me to subscribe, but, yeah. Wow, try 3 months for $105, but just for $6. Cancel anytime. That's insane. $105 for 3 months normally. At some point, I'm not going to be able to read articles. It's all going to be behind paywalls because all the advertisements. I mean, there's not even really that many advertisements on this article itself. So, all right, let's get into it. Bloomberg Business Week. It's by Max Abelson. I apologize if I pronounced it wrong. Maybe it's Abelson, maybe, but I'll just say Abelson. COVID conversations with one of America's richest men. How a pandemic unfolds when you're a Wall Street billionaire. So this is quite possibly, and I only read, I think, the first paragraph, but this is maybe an introduction into how a billionaire thought at the same time that I was going through this different emotions or maybe similar emotions. Who knows? Is this a humanizing story? Is it a bastardization of billionaires? I'm not sure yet. I do assume, since it's coming from Bloomberg Business Week, that it probably doesn't slander billionaires that hard, especially since a billionaire is named on the news website. So I am just going to assume that they didn't want to do wrong by Mr. Bloomberg by bashing billionaires too much. I don't really see non-capitalists probably working on Bloomberg, but who knows? Maybe Bloomberg allows different ideologies. I doubt it, but let's get it. Max Abelson writes, on the day the coronavirus was declared a pandemic, I called the richest person I know. The world was spiraling into chaos with 118,319 confirmed cases and 4,292 deaths in at least 100 countries, and I thought someone so well connected might know what was going on. Quote, what the fuck? I'm not worried, unquote, he said. Quote, I'm sure I already have it. What do I care? Unquote. His family was heading to their country house outside of New York City, but he was staying put, working the phones for his job, investing billions of dollars for clients. He didn't know much about the unfolding catastrophe, which made him just like everyone else. The next day, March 12th, the stock market collapsed, ending an 11-year bull market. The S&P 500's 9.5% plummet was the biggest since Black Monday in 1987. I called the investor back. Quote, "It's not this panic. Oh my God, the world is going to end. Everyone knows it's over in 2 months." His dismissiveness was eerie. Quote, "You know the world is fine." Unquote. In the previous 24 hours, the World Health Organization had reported almost 7,000 more cases globally, and the death count had grown by more than 300. Northern Italian hospital hallways were filling with beds. Tom Hanks fell sick in Australia. March Madness was canceled. Broadway shut down. President Trump congratulated himself on what a great job he was doing and said it would all go away. I want to tell you a bit about the guy I called up, my billionaire. It's his billionaire. It's Mike's billionaire. The article continues, "There's no way to understand American power without understanding people like him. He's part of a generation of executives who've made fortunes from the proliferation of private equity, hedge funds, and other forms of financial engineering over the past few decades, yes, as Wall Street became more and more central to the U.S. economy, yes. Wealth on his scale sometimes flattens a personality, but he usually comes off as open and lighthearted with a confidence that can be infectious rather than off-putting." This is a friend. Members of his class are supposed to be brilliant at analyzing and managing risk, so I was surprised to find that he seemed unbothered by what looked to the non-billionaires around me like a uniquely dangerous threat. I have to just say real quick here that that members of his class, supposedly being brilliant at analyzing and managing risks, were unable to predict the outcome of a pandemic. Hedge fund investors not being epidemiologists or virologists? What a surprise. Okay, but I'm going to continue here. I asked him how his circle was talking about the virus. Quote, "Some people are going to die, but it's old people, and if they do, it's okay." He replied. He then paused. "No, that's not okay. This isn't that bad." Unquote. Yeah, I want to just say hello here. Yeah, he's cool with old people dying, so that's weird that he's so open-minded and lighthearted that he was cool with old people dying, and then said that statement wasn't okay because the situation isn't that bad. But that's very vague language. I don't really necessarily know what to think. I kind of want to blame the guy for the horrible, like, Mike, why would you quote him like this? Like, incomplete sentences and thought, bro. But the article continues. He seems to know how cold and disconnected that sounded. Some billionaires take pleasure in playing up nasty reputations, but this one considers himself to be thoughtful, generous, lucky, and friendly to his workers. Still, he didn't walk his words all the way back. This is the article. And I just want to speak my own truth here. Some billionaires take pleasure in playing up nasty reputations. Right, some do, but him considering himself to be thoughtful, generous, lucky, and friendly, like, that's also, both of these are attributes that are just, easily labeled on anybody of any class, really. Although poor people tend to be less generous in a lot of situations because they might be super poor. But, they still find ways to be uber generous if, the opportunity is to come. It just depends on the person. So we are, I guess, in this article getting the caricature or the silhouette of the type of billionaire that this is. Which, this is still a very third account. Like, it's as if all you have is this guy describing what his friend is like. So, it's like, hey, we should hang out with my friend, Bill Gates. He's really cool. He thinks of himself like really generous, man. Like, I know you've heard of billionaires before, like being these cruel, profiteering, exploitative SOBs, man. But my boy Gates, bro, like, he is so considerate and thoughtful. You know, and you could believe people easily on that premise, especially depending on how much you actually trust that friend in this situation describing that to you. But you know, it's so much better to get to know somebody at first account and not by second or third. But let's get it. The article continues. It felt somewhat perverse to be soliciting the thoughts of someone so privileged and well protected at a time of such intense vulnerability. Why should Americans hear from a rich white man right now? Without question, the stories of the people who were suffering and those who were on the front lines aiding them needed to be told urgently. At the same time, there were already signs that the unequal system Wall Street thrives on would exacerbate the crisis, while lower-income communities were disproportionately harmed by both the virus and its economic effects. That's fascinating that this article just took like a slight left turn. Just, you know, Wall Street kind of exploits, you know, bad situations. They're opportunists, you know, swerve left a little bit. Just interesting. The article continues. There was speculation as New York City declared a state of emergency and Congress negotiated sweeping relief packages that the pandemic could become a great equalizer. A cataclysm that would lead to change that leveled an unlevel field. Who? Who thought that? Man, and like honestly, with the stimulus package and like every American getting $1,200, and then like businesses and large corporations getting somewhere between hundreds of thousands to millions. It's just like, but it's so much to it. But there was a very heavy redistribution of wealth. And it's still been happening with the amount of taxes that they don't have to pay. Like, we fund the shit out of corporations, and they fund less and less to the government. So, yep, they don't want to put their funds in it. You know, the corporations essentially, kind of to an extent, believe in defund the police. All right. Fun's over. Back to the article. Or it could prove to be just another opportunity for the country's most powerful capitalists to make money, and perhaps to tilt the field further. Yeah, that's the only outcome everybody saw. If anyone could help me gauge this dynamic, I thought it would be my billionaire. I asked him if I could keep calling. He said yes, and that he'd tell me what was really on his mind as long as he remained anonymous. After considering what might be coming in the U.S., I agreed. I wanted to know how people like him would experience this calamity, and I couldn't turn away. All right, before we really get into the meat of here, because that was essentially an introduction, we're basically just looking at an archetype of a certain kind of billionaire. We're not going to get the overall scope of how the billionaire class really faces their situation. But we can be rest assured, since they are billionaires, they have it very comfy. Having billions of dollars is a very comfy couch to land on. When it comes to medical bills and getting tests and staying safe, and also, you know, the types of work that billionaires tend to do, maybe doesn't have to deal with so much essential work, right? Being out on the front lines. Yeah, so we're not going to get like a sweeping scope of the billionaire point of view. We're just going to get one person's opinion, who then is effectively, because of anonymity, is going to shape a billionaire's thought process. I did air quotes if you're not watching this in video form and you're listening, but we are going to look at a caricature. We are going to... Is it a straw man? I don't know. It's an anonymous person willing to opinionate their views, but what we're focusing in here on, and this is the reason why the article was here, is to get the thoughts of a billionaire, to get inside of the head of a billionaire during this specific crisis. But it won't be every billionaire's. especially someone who is actually very active in, like, say, the pharmaceutical industry or the healthcare industry or the insurance industry. So let's continue on. We spoke again the next week. On March 16th, the days in between had been ugly. Oops. I read those two sentences terrible, but let's continue on. Case numbers in New York City were starting to boom, and officials sent home more than 1 million students. The U.S. declared a national emergency, and COVID-19 tests were in short supply. Wall Street was in the midst of its worst week since the global financial crisis. Worldwide, there were 167,515 reported cases and 6,606 deaths. The investor told me the economic wipeout didn't look so bad if you compared it with the vastness of the U.S. economy. Technically, this was true, but Federal Reserve officials were already tearing through their playbook from the last crisis. Big banks were preparing to shut branches. I asked him if he'd talked to the boss of the biggest one, J.P. Morgan Chase and Companies, Jamie Dimon, and he sneezed. Now, if you're on a bus and you start sneezing, everybody gets upset, he said. I asked if he actually takes the bus. No, he replied. Okay. That was a pretty dumb paragraph. I asked him if he'd talked to the boss of one of the biggest J.P. Morgan Chase and Companies, Jamie Dimon. And then he sneezed, and then I forgot my question. So I asked him if he actually takes the bus. Unless we're supposed to assume somehow that he's like saying, now if you're on a bus and you start sneezing, everybody gets upset. And then he asked him if he actually takes the bus, and no was the answer. Is that just like some weird way of saying like he was answering it the other question? No, none of that makes sense. The investor told me the economic wipeout didn't look so bad if you compared it with the vastness of the U.S. economy, which is, it's significant to admit that the impact of the economic lockdown wasn't so bad. That's very interesting. Everybody acted like it was the worst possible thing to happen. The article continues. I mentioned that other rich people were scrambling to protect their health. Some were securing special access to virus tests and experimental drugs, if not their own ventilators. Quote, I could get my hand on a test, he said. He told me his peers were quietly inquiring about reserving beds at private hospitals in case they got sick. He had connections to the boards of the best hospitals, but said he'd call in favors only for the people closest to him. Now, I want to add here, and this article is missing a period at the very end there, but, it's fascinating that it says at private hospitals. We have heard that, hospitals that are available to everybody, and, we have tons of private hospitals. That's another insane way to frame it. As if as if the rich have their very own hospitals, which I'm sure they do in some situations, but we did already see that at private hospitals and even university hospitals and hospitals connected to the state still have these programs. But private hospitals have the program, the premium pass, that allows VIP, very important patients, to get either ahead or special treatment. That was something that we went over with the, I think 2 streams ago, it was a little bit ago, talking about wealth care. So go back and look at that, or just look up the article, Healthcare versus Wealth Care. Great. It's great stuff. I think the original is from 2016. Meanwhile, he joined his family at his country house, taking work calls on the phone. There was no staff, so he drove to the store himself, wearing a mask. He could have hopped in his private jet and escaped, but really, he pointed out, where was he going to go? I guess. So he could work from home. No problem. The article continues, the catastrophe spread. By March 23rd, New York City's case count was rising by thousands each day. People at Rikers Island jail fell sick, and city hospitals were running out of masks and gloves. Hold on. I want to just talk about the fact that this really sounds like by March 23rd, and somehow we had already gotten past all of this. Like, no. Parts of the country and parts of New York are still dealing with this. So, in this capacity. So, to make it sound like a lot of things have already passed over is kind of annoying. But yeah, by March 23rd. Okay. I'm just kind of conflating that issue and splitting my own hairs. I should just move on. The U.S. was threatening to become a new hub for the virus, right as Trump was saying the economy would soon reopen. The UK announced it would lock down. Deaths were spiking in Western Europe and Iran, with 14,509 in total worldwide and 332,930 cases. Weird way to frame that again. When I spoke with my billionaire that day, I thought he might be scared or sad. Instead, he was irritated. Quote, everyone's working remote and realizing remote sucks. Unquote. I asked how it was different from the 2008 financial crisis. Quote, I have to make individual calls. It's so hard. It's so hard to deal with all these things. You can't get 5 people in a room, 10 people in a room. I'm dealing with all this shit with my hands tied behind my back. Unquote. What am I reading? Like, woe is me, the billionaire who has a hard time making phone calls. Should have had a better infrastructure. We should have known that at some point there would be a viral infection, or I guess an aerosol infection, that, would require us to separate for a little bit. Take some fucking team effort. Anyways, the country was sliding into a recession, leaving Wall Street facing billions of dollars in potential loan defaults. But it was also profiting from the carnage. Yep, JP Morgan's derivative traders were on their way to making $1.5 billion in the first few months of the year, while a small group of hedge funds was pulling in billions from exotic types of bets. It wasn't just credit default swaps, the derivative that starred in the 2008 financial crisis, but credit default swaps on indexes that were themselves made up of credit default swaps. Private equity executives who together had about $2 trillion of cash to spend were on the hunt for bargains. In Manhattan, fevers have been reported inside Goldman Sachs Group Inc.'s skyscraper, but some traders at JP Morgan's derivatives desk were still sitting close together. My billionaire thought young and healthy workers should be in the office, and he didn't just mean his own. Quote, why aren't we saying, hey, anybody who's 30 or under, you guys still go to work. You guys just don't see your parents. Unquote. You just don't get to see your parents. You just don't. Okay. All right. Get to work. No parents if you want them to live. The article continues. One answer was that they might be afraid to die. A poll would soon show that almost 9 out of 10 Americans weren't ready to return to daily life. His pronouncements sounded like the ones coming from Trump and his circle. The president was now saying the economy should restart quickly despite the warnings of health officials. The billionaire saw Trump as a buffoon, and yet he mostly agreed with what the president was saying about the virus. Interesting. Quote, if people aren't going to work, it's a depression. Trump isn't wrong. He just doesn't know how to explain it, unquote, the billionaire said. He took a stab at putting it succinctly. Quote, do you want to end up losing your life savings so that the old person you don't know can live? Unquote. I haven't read the next sentence yet, but that is an incredibly cold, callous, capitalist look at the world, and it is not a reason that we should continue on this economic system in the time of crisis. Yeah, if your life savings is completely torn away because old people need to make it through this harsh pandemic, then how strong is this economy really? Wow, wee wah. Yeah, but we have a global struggle going on, so can't really get into the fine split hairs in that. That's for a much broader discussion. But just know, class warfare is definitely a worldwide struggle. But let's continue on. The article says, I asked if he intended to say that Americans were going to have to die to save the economy. Public health and private profit were at odds. He answered, and one was going to win out. Yep, this is just like saying that class warfare exists, just without saying class warfare exists. Quote, by focusing on the economy, a lot of people are going to get sick. And if we focus on public health, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Unquote. Oh, no. Back to it. Quote, I know which way it's going to end, but you can't say it. You sound insensitive. In today's world, everybody's going to attack you. Yeah, unquote. Oh, God. I'm starting to get a little blurry here now because this fucking article just got like uber... man, fascist isn't necessarily the word for it, but like to have an economy much more important than people's lives. Our system is very dogmatic, and the economy is definitely God. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's, you just got to face that truth in America and, act accordingly. Man, at that point. But this is, I actually am starting to find it a bit more interesting that this is what's going on in the head of a billionaire, and he is an investor. He manages hedge funds, and allegedly manages millions of dollars, if not billions. And so, taking that into consideration, he is going to be much more concerned of the economy because his life is directly affected by it. But what am I saying? Everybody's lives are directly affected by it. It's just his public... he is not necessarily that affected by public health because as long as the economy is running and people are getting sick, like, he doesn't get affected by one or the other. Like, if the economy is successful, he's less likely to actually get sick because he has the access to testing, he has access to maybe his own ventilators, he has access to private hospitals and premium memberships. If the economy is tanking but public health is doing well, then he actually loses money, and that's bad for him and his class. So this paragraph here is an admission of class warfare. And for us to justify and legitimize a system that's stuck on public health and private profit being at odds? What? How is this allowed to propagate? Like, how is this allowed to continue? I understand we're in extraordinary circumstances, but this is fucked up. It's a fucked up situation, and nobody should be able to deny how fucked up and immoral, almost unethical our system is. All right. The article continues. Wall Street holds sway over millions of American workers. Private equity firms buy up companies and exercise control over their employees. Activist investors buy up stakes in companies and can push them to cut staff. Alternative funds help determine the fate of corporations by owning their debt or lending to them directly. I wondered if the carnage might present opportunities for my billionaire to profit. It would, he told me, but what he seemed to crave right then was a return to the economic reality he'd known before. Quote, the person who explained this best to me is my contractor, he said, referring to a man who was building a house for him. Quote, I say to him, hey, what are you going to do if we have this lockdown? How long do you think we won't be able to build for? Quote, he looks at me like, what are you are you talking to me? If you're willing to pay us, we're willing to show up. I said, aren't you worried? He said, I don't have money in the bank like you. If I ain't working, my family ain't eating, and then my mortgage ain't getting paid. Can I take 2 weeks off? Sure. But anything more than that? No. I said, okay, I don't care. If you guys want to show up, I'll pay you. He looked at me. Hey, big guy, this is America. Unquote. The billionaire stopped his story and addressed me directly. Quote, how would you like it if you didn't get paid? He asked, then he shifted gears. Quote, why don't you talk about yourself? He said. How much do you make? He ventured a guess and was way off. I wouldn't tell him by how much or in which direction. Quote, don't be embarrassed, he said. You're doing a great job, unquote. Wow, this is a lot of bit of like fluff. That's so strange. That's so strange. Like, they're talking about, like, whether or not he would be able to profit off of the situation, and he admits that he would be able to, because there were ways to, game the stock market, because the stock market in itself is essentially a game, to where you just move your money into different odds of investment credit. I don't understand economics that much. I'm just kind of... What he is interested in, it seems that this specific billionaire spoken about in this article wants to see the continual growth and not just a short-term profit. He wants to see a long-term growth, something that lasts longer than just a pandemic. But it says right here that he also wanted to move back to the economic reality he'd known before, and the story that he goes into is about an unfortunate man who can afford maybe 2 weeks off of unpaid labor, but he has to go back to work immediately because he hasn't been making money in that time. Maybe that fits into the same narrative as the billionaire, but again, billionaires are living at a very vast and different set of means. Their cars are more expensive, their houses and mortgages are more expensive, so they have a much higher cost of living. And so if they start losing millions, it's the same, not exactly the same, because you can obviously just reappropriate your funds to be a much safer social net, your own billions. But he is essentially equating a construction worker that works for him not being able to work because of public health. Now, that still is just a vacuum that capitalism continued to fill because the government didn't want to create a much stronger welfare system than it already has. It had the capacity to handle about 30% of Americans, putting us in a very deep hole because that money, it's just like everything else going on. We have more public spending and less revenue because corporations are paying significantly less taxes. But to equate the certain situation of a construction worker and his family working 2 weeks and not being able to afford their mortgage as the same as a billionaire not being able to afford his mortgage, or maybe there's several mortgages, it's just not really all that equivocal. Because we have to find a way that the billionaires can dissolve a lot of their assets to turn it into actual cash, which is much more mobile than, say, a house. But they have very large amounts of assets that are just not even close to equitable with the assets of the construction workers. So it's just so fascinating that that's the story he would go with. By the end of March, I will catch my brain one day, and I will tell you I am your master. But until then, the article continues. By the end of March, forklifts were loading bodies into refrigerated trucks outside New York City hospitals in Staten Island. On Amazon.com, warehouse worker led a walk. Okay, I'm very bad at reading the first two sentences of the paragraphs. By the end of March, forklifts were loading bodies into refrigerated trucks outside of New York City hospitals. In Staten Island, on Amazon.com, warehouse worker led a walkout over health concerns and was swiftly fired. Black communities were being hit especially hard, and in the past week, the number of deaths worldwide had more than doubled to 36,405, with 750,890 cases. There was action in Washington, though. Trump had signed the largest stimulus package in U.S. history, a $2 trillion bill that doled out loans and tax breaks to businesses big and small, sent $1,200 to many Americans, and provided an extra $600 of weekly unemployment benefits. But it still left millions of people vulnerable in a country where about 27.5 million were left without health insurance, and more than 100 million still had to be physically present at their jobs. It's about a third. My billionaire and I didn't discuss any of that when I called. It was after dinner, and he had to get back to his family. Quote, "I'm playing Risk," he said. We picked up again the next day, April 1st. Jesus. What a dumb paragraph. It's like, there was a lot of this going on, and my billionaire was playing Risk at the time I called him. Cool. We picked up... Why didn't he just discuss the actual... Or whatever. We picked up again the next day, April 1st. The game was still going on. Quote, "We wiped out the other two guys," he told him. "I think I'm in a good position." Unquote. I asked him if he'd reconsidered our anonymity agreement and let me use his name in the story. "No," he said. "Americans were too angry at rich bosses." Quote, "Everybody's perception is the same. You should be paying us irrespective of the fact that we're not working. And if you don't, it's because you're greedy." Unquote. Quote, "You're wrong. Sure, I'm happy to pay you for a month. I'm happy to pay you for 2 months. But at a certain point, you have to stop." Unquote. I wanted to know if he could understand why employees might feel they deserved pay for work they were missing only because of a national emergency. He dove into a genuine attempt at empathy. A month ago, he acknowledged most Americans hadn't expected to get paid without working. Quote, "Now it's, hey, wait a minute. I can't work, not because I don't want to, but I can't. And you should be paying me. And if you don't, you're jeopardizing my life." Unquote. He went on in the voice of a worker, quote, "So-and-so can afford to pay me, but I can't afford to go to work. If I do, I'm jeopardizing my life. Is my life not worth it?" Unquote. He remembered that he had originally wanted young and healthy employees to get back to work as soon as possible, but he'd changed his mind. Quote, "Everybody's come to the conclusion, myself as well, you can't do that, because you're having people who are 20 and 30 getting symptoms and being rushed to the hospital." Unquote. The system is, quote, "The system is overwhelmed, and if the system is overwhelmed, you might as well wait." Unquote. Sorry, it's just like every way he quotes this is, it's not meant to be read aloud. Inside the White House, Trump had been backtracking from his cheeriness, warning at a briefing of great pain to come. Over the past 3 years, his administration had been particularly good for rich executives, cutting their taxes and stripping back corporate rules. I asked the investor what he made of the president on the whole. Quote, "The things he's done on the business side, I would tell you, have all been positive. Does that offset all the harm he's done? Economically, yes. For me, that's been beneficial. Socially, how it hurts people, how I view the world, no. I would rather have less money to have a better world, but okay, my punishment is I have more money to have a more fucked world." Unquote. Yeah, but I feel like your economic status just grants you the privilege of not having to deal with most of the bullshit in the fucked world. But let's move on. 2 days later, I called him. God damn it. Like, then, you and your other billionaires shouldn't be okay with your punishment. Like, and yeah, you're not the ones who are actually taking the brunt of the punishment. Anyways, 2 days later, I called him back and asked who won his game of Risk. Quote, "I did." Unquote. All right. I don't know if I'm going to read the rest of this. Honestly, the guy, I don't see eye to eye with a billionaire. He even gets into George Floyd here, and to be honest, after reading most of the opinions from this, yeah, I don't want to get any more. I think I've understood the basic narrative is that a lot of it is just the same kind of shit that you would expect anybody trying to run a business. Drink more water. But I think we got to a good point there that that they definitely have interest in President Trump, and they do recognize that certain things that he does is detrimental to the entire population of the United States, but mostly the working class. Let's be honest. We don't have a lot of money to kind of buy our problems away. But it is fascinating to hear somebody say that they acknowledge that Trump is kind of ruining our cultural fabric with divisive rhetoric. But he says that he does benefit from the economy. I just want to admit that with him also benefiting from the economy, hoarding more wealth, making more riches, the people on the bottom are suffering more and more. Like, he doesn't like that we're all in these divisive and racist and divisional ideological lines, all of that, just everything that is pulling us apart about Trump as a community, as a nation, as a United States. All of that he recognizes, he acknowledges, and he knows is a problem. But he's also acknowledging that he benefits economically, so he might see the Trump presidency just completely positive because he can handle the economic side by having basically unfettered capitalism. We've reached that point almost closely. Yeah, all of that is just very negative for the working class. For everybody in my position, this is not good in any way whatsoever. And I just want to acknowledge that earlier here that he did say that public health and private business have conflicting interests. So that was one of the very first things said in this article. But let's move on from this oblivious, unself-aware billionaire who is just in and out of introspection, and is probably Mark Cuban. Let's get to Roger Stone with his first interview. Yeah! I haven't watched it yet, but let's do it. Let's fucking do it. Just want to do it.
Now, as we told you, President Trump announced Friday he was commuting the sentence of Roger Stone just days before Stone was set to start a 3+ year prison sentence stemming from Robert Mueller's Russian witch hunt. Remember, Stone was convicted of process crimes relating to 2017 and statements he made to House lawmakers. In other words, lying before Congress. Adam Schiff presiding, the biggest liar in Congress. Now, neither the Schiff show nor Robert Mueller produced one bit of evidence that Stone was working with anybody colluding with Russia. And by the way, as the White House press secretary explained, quote, these charges were the product of recklessness born of frustration.
They did prove that Roger Stone was in communication with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who was the one who released the emails, Hillary Clinton's emails, who were given to Wikipedia so far by an unknown source. Although some suspect Russian conspiracy.
And malice. Joining us now, Roger Stone, first TV interview, and his attorney, David Schoen.
Of course, his first TV interview is on Fox News. And of course he brings his attorney, because honestly, and I haven't watched the documentary yet, I want to. Trial by Media. Just saying it.
I would like to say to you, Roger, well, I'm glad you had your sentence commuted and you're not headed to prison this week. There's a part of me that is also very angry and very concerned for the country based on the entire handling of your matter. Why don't I just let you say it in your own words, what this has been like for you?
Well, this is the most horrible experience you can have, because I see immediately why 99% of the people who choose to plead not guilty and go to trial lose. When you're up against the horrific and deep-pocketed resources of the federal government and these really...
So he pleaded guilty because people who tend to plead not guilty are convicted more often. But he was commuted by his friend, so I feel like his statistic does not apply because he hit extraordinary circumstances. He is an exception to a rule, and that should be the theme when we discuss Roger Stone.
Sadistic, arrogant, politically motivated prosecutors. I had a biased judge, I had a stacked jury, I had a...
Yep, I just burped really hard because I think it's hilarious that he is claiming that he was somehow, like everything about it is like somehow a witch hunt, as if like the rich are just not supposed to be held accountable for the things or actions that they commit. When we have these laws, but already we're being shown that at this point, these laws are going to start exempting more and more connected influencers of power.
A corrupt jury forewoman. As my friend Tucker Carlson said, my trial was over before it started.
It's funny that he has to say my friend Tucker Carlson when Tucker Carlson just announced that he went on vacation because he had a white supremacist writing for him for a fucking minute. It's pretty funny.
And when you go through something like this, Sean, you find out who your real friends are and who the people are who really never were your friends. You have been a tremendous friend. You have done a great job of keeping people informed, but I have to really single out your Fox News colleague, Tucker Carlson. He took up the cudgels early. He stayed on this case with every twist and turn, wasn't afraid to take on the judge, laid out the jury question, encouraged me when I got discouraged. He's a man of incredible loyalty, and he's a great friend. He may be the best friend a man can have, so my hat's off to him. And also Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida, who I hope to live long enough to see in the White House. He was a great friend who never gave up in trying to make sure everybody understood the injustice that I had been through. But so many others, Bernie Carrick, the former New York police commissioner, and Charlie Kirk.
That's funny. He gives a shout out to Charlie Kirk after like flipping a page to make... It's like he literally has... This is... I just realized what happened. He has... It's like, this is like he won an Emmy or like a Golden Globe, and he's like, I want to thank Charlie Kirk. I want to thank Matt Gaetz. I want to thank Nixon. I know you're out there watching somewhere.
Reverend Franklin Graham, pastors Mark Burns and Daryl Scott, Randy Coggins, a dynamic young...
He's literally reading a list of names that he's giving shouts outs to because he's shouts out to keeping me out of jail.
Evangelist from Florida, the entire Flynn family, General Mike Flynn, a man who's still being persecuted. My hat's off to all of them because they helped me and my wife and my family through the scariest, most difficult process you can imagine. But above all, I must tell you, Sean, based on advice from you and Reverend Graham and the two pastors I mentioned, I really want to thank God, because I was literally hours away from being sent to a COVID-infested prison in violation of the current Bureau of Prisons and DOJ policies, in violation of every precedent in the country where people going to jail or in jail were asking for compassionate release, and in every case it was granted. I'm 67 years old. I've had a lifelong problem of respiratory problems. I was facing what I really believed was a near-death sentence.
I've had a lifelong problem of respiratory problems. But I just also want to point out real quick. He would have gone to a rich person's jail. They don't go to the same jails as we do, a lot of the time.
Sentence. So you, particularly Tucker, Matt Gaetz, and everybody I named, my heart goes out to you. I'm deeply, deeply grateful. But more than anything else, I'm grateful for God, because as you told me, if I would rededicate my life to Christ, if I would be reborn, I can remember it like it was yesterday. And your advice was as solid as can be. You said God will never desert you. He will never abandon you. He will protect you if you confess your sins and you walk in his way. And I have done my very best to do that.
Let me go through, and I want you to tell people.
Man, he like literally hit all the points he needed to, and that was in like 4 minutes. That's 4.5 minutes right there that he almost just spoke for the entire 4.5 minutes, maybe like 4 minutes. But that is, wow, wah. Wow, I am just so bubbled up by like all of that. He is a master at propaganda, at speech. Like, holy fuck, did he like fit in like the whole criminal reform thing, like everything, like when a celebrity would go to rehab, he's got like that whole speech of like their like second coming, their rebirth story. He got it fucking perfect, and he didn't even go to jail.
Because there's this whole system of justice where you can use Sammy the Bull Gravano as the biggest case in point. He commits 19 murders, and he's given a get-out-of-jail-free card in a witness protection program because he flipped on John Gotti. All right, put that aside for a second.
Yeah, but how much... I don't know the full story of this, but I do know that informants with the FBI or, you know, with a certain law enforcement, you know, they tend to get commuted sentences, or they get special treatment because of their relationship with law enforcement and intelligence agencies. So it's a quid pro quo situation. I don't know what Bull's was, but I'm just going to assume that they had bigger fish to fry.
In your case, did Mueller and his team offer anything of value? Your freedom, for example, I would argue is of great value. If you would...
Oh my God. The best thing that they did was they just all kept their mouths shut. They did not throw Trump under the bus. And maybe he chose the best people for that, whether it's Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen did throw Trump under the bus, and I don't think Did Cohen get pardoned? Did Cohen get pardoned? Oh, shit. I don't think so, right? American lawyer, Michael Cohen. Oh yeah, he got back. He was like on a fucking house arrest. Yeah, that's right. And then he got taken back to prison because he broke his probation or whatever the fuck. Yeah, so he's still guilty and all of that shit. Yeah, for violating terms of early what? Prison. Let me get this. Let me get it a little straight. Prison officials come before taking back behind bars. Why would you have two different early release terms of early release? Yeah, I think he got out because of the corona or some shit, and yeah, he still he violated his terms. So maybe they're still trying to close in on Trump in certain ways with an investigation. Maybe not. I doubt it. It just seems like Trump's going to continue on committing crimes until the crime is the United States itself. Criminal.
Say certain things they wanted you to say, whether they were true or not.
Well, in the beginning of the case, Sean, I don't think that was their intention. But as they got closer and closer to having to issue the Mueller report, and they realized that they had no Russian collusion, because there was no Russian collusion. It was a hoax. On July 24th, Jeannie Rhee, who was heading my prosecution within the Mueller team, that's extraordinary in itself, because she previously represented Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation in the illegal email server case and the missing email case. So she had a clear bias. She was a maximum donor to both of Hillary's presidential campaigns. By the way, she has all the charm of a North Korean prison guard. She made it very clear to...
Jesus. Wait, did she defended Hillary?
The prosecution within the Mueller team. That's extraordinary in itself, because she previously represented Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation in the illegal email server case and the missing email case.
What's her name?
Because she heading my prosecution had no Russian collusion because there was no Russian collusion. It was a hoax. On July 24th, Jeannie Rhee, who was heading my prosecution within the Mueller team.
I don't know how to spell her name. How do you spell Jeannie Rhee? Jeannie Rhee? Jeannie Rhee? Oh, man. Prosecutor. Alright. Jeannie Rhee. Jeannie Rhee, the newest Manafort prosecutor. Mueller prosecutor. Alright, let's see. Clinton. Yeah, Law and Crime has something about Mueller not knowing. Top investigators, Democratic ties, raise new bias. So Fox News already reported that as well. Mueller investigator under scrutiny for her legal work. It's also related from Daily Mail. So it's out there. It's information. Congressional regular went under investigation. Let's see. It's fascinating that it's just those articles and not necessarily anything about her, like a time when she was defending, like not a specific article from when she was defending the Clintons. It's all from like when everybody announced that she was working on the Mueller case. So that's pretty fascinating that that's the only time that we discuss this, because I can't find anything about the Clintons. Clinton server. Yeah, so it's the same shit, man. Like, what am I supposed to do? All right. Hillary Clinton went under investigation for the mishandling of classified information. The fuck is this from? Attack. This is the file reported that alleging that there's a bias related to people investigating Trump towards the Clinton Foundation. This is the first initial report into Congress. Who wrote it? There wasn't even an author at the beginning of it, so it's fascinating that this is just on the congressional record. It has no citations. So that's great. I'm just going to keep scrolling down to see if I can get a fucking author here. Yeah, this is someone's specific speech from their time in Congress, House of Representatives. Who the fuck? Oh, nice. It's there it is. It's actually at the beginning. It's Matt Gaetz. It's Matt Gaetz saying that it's his whole defense as to probably why the Mueller investigation or the the whole prosecution of Trump's team to be ended. Yeah, it's Matt Gaetz' speech. So I probably could just find it on YouTube as well. But that doesn't provide any evidence from the case that... It's just all articles from like 2018. What are we doing, guys? What the fuck are we doing? It brings up a fucking 8chan thing on Google. There's not a single article here about Clinton's email servers and Jenny Rhee actually defending her. There's nothing about this. How can I verify what he says? Media post, publications, advanced searched. Written by Diane Dilworth? Why the fuck would I only want articles just written by Diane Dilworth? Is there an any category? I'm wasting so much time. Nothing? Yeah, it found me nothing. Whatever. What the fuck ever. Alright, so I can't verify this Jenny Rhee accusation. I'm just going to assume it's true because...
That's extraordinary in itself because she previously represented Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation in the illegal email server case and the missing email case. So she had a clear bias. She was a maximum donor to both of Hillary's presidential campaigns. By the way, she has all the charm of a North Korean prison guard. She made it very clear to one of my lawyers after a hearing she asked to see him privately that if I would remember certain phone conversations I had with candidate Trump, if I would come clean, if I would confess, that they might be willing to, recommend leniency to the judge. Perhaps I wouldn't even serve any jail time. And I didn't have to think about it very long. I said, absolutely not. There was no circumstance under which I would bear false witness against the president. I was just not willing to lie. Now, in the last 2 days, when I said that, people said, you see, Stone had the goods on Trump, and he traded his silence for a commutation. That is patently false. I never said that. I never implied that. What I said has been consistent, that I would not lie against my friend of 40 years so they could use it for impeachment. They wanted me to be the ham in their ham sandwich because they knew the Mueller report, particularly on Russia, was a...
Let's just acknowledge that their narrative, the right's narrative, and his narrative is that he did nothing wrong and that the police wanted him to lie and throw Trump under the bus so that they could get an impeachment. He's making a pretty funny face on the video. But the actual narrative is that Trump had him commit a crime and he covered up for Trump and admitted to lying to investigators about that. So he pled his guilt to committing crimes himself, but by not implicating the president, he knew that he would get a pardon. He knew at the end of the road that there was a pardon at that rainbow, that was the pot of gold.
Dud. It was a goose egg. They had nothing, and they were hoping that I would recharacterize my phone calls. I think these phone calls that were plea bargain induced claims by Michael Cohen and Rick Gates, for which they could never find any corroboration, and I simply refused to do it.
Let me go to you, David Schoen, and I'll ask you both the same question simultaneously. Roger, I think I've known you well enough over the years. You're a fighter. Your instincts are going to be, okay, now I'm going to go back and maybe if you go back and you appeal this and you open up this case again, I would argue right now you're home free. And I think that I saw nothing but corruption in that courtroom by that judge and that jury and not giving you another trial. David, I would say that if you go forward with that, you are now putting Roger's life back in jeopardy again. And I don't know. I don't have any faith in that system. I don't have any faith in that judge. I don't have any faith with that jury. Nobody on this case, do I believe, is honorable here.
Yeah, I think you're right. You raise a very interesting question and a perplexing one. We have to sit down and make a decision. as to whether to go forward with the appeal, knowing that a win in this case, and there should be a win, classic Fifth and Sixth Amendment violations, would go right back to the same judge and a courtroom of injustice. Let me just say this to you. This commutation is a great tribute to President Trump for 3 reasons. He sends the message that the Mueller team was rotten to the core from its inception. When Mr. Mueller picked Andrew
I've been saying
Weissman
that
as
for
his
over
right...
3 years, David. Screaming
Well, you're right.
it.
You don't pick an investigation that involves the President of the United States requires integrity. You don't pick an Andrew Weissman, who's the most ethically bankrupt prosecutor I've ever come across. I represent 2 men right now, Mr. Arena, Mr. Sessa, who were wrongfully convicted with him. You talked about making deals with witnesses. He lied about those deals. He was mentioned specifically by a judge for his misconduct. So that's one thing. The Mueller team was rotten to the core, filled with partisans. Number 2, an unfair trial. The president recognized that. The judge denied the entire defense theory. Mr. Stone wasn't allowed to mention on social media or make a defense theory that in any way challenged the integrity of the Mueller team. Unprecedented. And thirdly, the president saved a life here.
I mean, we can't argue the actual conditions of the court because none of it was televised. None of it was there wasn't a very big public transparency with the Stone case or court proceedings. So it's kind of unfortunate. Yeah, we can't really defer to any examples here because this is all anecdotal evidence of one side of the story.
Because the judge's decision on denying a surrender extension when COVID was in the prison and with these health conditions goes against all authority in the country on this issue, as did the Court of Appeals.
You know, I'm listening to your attorney, and I know David a long time, Roger. I've known you a long time. And you're a character. Everybody knows you're a character. But that's not about you as a character. I would want a fair and impartial jury for everybody.
I just want people to acknowledge that everybody that is in this video or in this report here, that they are all very close friends and they have very close interests to each other, shared interests. So I just want you to take that into perspective and wonder if they have your shared interests in mind when they're turning Roger Stone into an angel.
Buddy, I wouldn't want any Democrat or liberal to have 29 guys in tactical gear over a process crime. I wouldn't want a gag order on any American. They should have a right to speak out in their own defense. I wouldn't want a jury foreperson as prejudiced or a judge that went along with this crap. My question to you is, we've seen this now with Papadopoulos. We've now seen this with Paul Manafort. We saw it with General Flynn. We've seen it with you. I'll be honest, Roger. I believe in our Constitution. I believe in our rule of law. I think I read a lot about equal justice and application of our laws. I don't see any of this in any of these cases. I see a travesty of injustice. You've been a part of it. I don't know. I'm losing faith in the system, Roger.
Well, you have a good reason to. I mean, you examine the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, where I had to file a last-minute emergency appeal of Judge Jackson's rule sending me to jail. She ignored all the legal precedents in that. She ignored my health conditions. She ignored the conditions at the prison at that time. And she ignored the current policies of DOJ and the BOP. Now, you would have thought that that would have been reversed in the appeals court, but they ruled for her 3-0. I'm afraid this is a fixed system. Above all, though, I guess I'd have to say the most important thing here is the courageousness of the president's act. I know there were many, many, many people who told him in an election year, don't do this. Let Roger Stone wait maybe for a pardon after the election. Sean, I don't think I would have lived that long. Not with my asthmatic condition, not with now 60 COVID-19 cases in that prison. So I have deep, deep affection for Donald Trump because I've known him 40 years. He's a man of great justice and fairness. He's a man of enormous courage. I knew he would take some shots for this, but I think most people, most fair-minded people, understand. He saved my life, and at least on paper, he gave me a chance to fight for vindication. Now, I'm not a fool. I'm going to be guided by the advice of my lawyers. As I understand it, if my conviction is overturned by the appeals court, I'd be back in front of Judge Jackson. Judge Jackson issued an incredible ruling that said that I could not raise misconduct by the special counsel, the FBI, the DOJ, or any member of Congress, Adam Schiff. So, I mean, If that were in place in General Flynn's case, we still wouldn't know how he was railroaded. We still wouldn't know about the political motivations behind taking him down. So I've got to become convinced I can get a fair second trial, because I certainly didn't get a fair first trial.
You had a gag order, and you weren't allowed to even put on your defense. You wanted to put on a defense. They denied you that right. Then, of course, we have the whole jury foreperson. This is on top of the raid, pre-dawn raid. By the way, I'm sure you probably called CNN, Roger, and said that. I do not believe you can get any fair trial in that courtroom or that system. I don't know. I think that probably every fiber of your being would want to be to fight.
He pled guilty. He was supposed to go to jail. Now, he tried to delay going to jail. He did not try to appeal his case. He pled guilty. So, already we are getting massive twisting of the facts. Like, this is just par for the course for Fox News at this point, and it's no wonder that Roger Stone decided to give his first interview here, because it's where his story would be sympathetically taken in and twisted like a fucking Twizzler.
To get the acquittal you believe you should get. But I don't know if I'd give you that advice, because I don't think there's anybody in that courtroom that is fair, Roger.
Well, and as you point out, Comey, Clapper, Brennan, McCabe, Strzok, Page, Rosenstein, Mueller himself, Hillary, they all lied under oath, but they lied about material things, consequential things. Therefore, they had an intent and a motive to lie. I was charged with making misstatements that were innocuous. And if you look at it very carefully, it's very clear what happened here. And that is that Aaron Zelinsky, the corrupt prosecutor, the dirtiest of Mueller's dirty cops, other than Weissman, shared the fruits of the surveillance into me with Adam Schiff so that he could fashion gotcha questions, most of them of no consequence. And then after the setup, in which I appeared voluntarily before the House Intelligence Committee, Schiff, in violation of House rules, shared the classified testimony with Mr. Zelinsky so Mr. Weissman could fashion a very contorted and contrived indictment. Yet today you have Mueller and Schiff and Rosenstein back to saying Stone was in cahoots with Russian intelligence. This is nonsense. They're all the way back to the Russia.
Was there ever any evidence of that, Roger?
False,
there was not. Was there any evidence ever given of any contact with any Russian intelligence?
It's so fascinating how journalistic Sean Hannity is acting here by just like, my friend, my homie, like, you were so wrongly prosecuted. Like, it's just, this is horrible reporting. This is just narrative shaping. That's all this is.
But there was evidence that I had a Twitter direct message exchange with Guccifer Point 2, a persona. But if you look at when that happened, it happened long after WikiLeaks had published all their material. And if you look at the actual content of the exchange, it's benign. There's no collusion. There's no collaboration. And thirdly, we don't even know that Guccifer 2.0 is a Russian asset. Just because...
I am really good at pausing these faces. But it's not the context of the text messaging, because, you know, that's easier to kind of obfuscate than it is like actual conversation, which we don't know had happened.
John Brennan says something's true. He said the Steele dossier was real too. So just because they assert something doesn't mean it's true. I could have proved at trial, using forensic evidence and expert testimony from fellows like Bill Binney, former SNA counterintelligence expert, and Ray McGovern, that no one hacked the DNC, that there was no online hack of the DNC, that the information based on the download times was downloaded to a portable disk and taken out the back door. But I wasn't allowed to present that defense because Judge Jackson would not allow it.
Roger, I want to believe in our system of justice, and in a way it worked, I guess, in the end with the president's commutation. But what happened to you, what happened to Papadopoulos, what happened to General Flynn, what happened to Manafort, what happened to the President of the United States, what happened to Carter Page, we're going to lose this country if this happens again. It's the biggest abuse of power corruption scandal in our history. Glad you're free tonight, Roger. We wish you Godspeed. And David, thank you for the great work you do as his attorney.
I'm just going to say that we all lost our country when all of Trump's criminal friends were allowed to commit their crimes. So that's really tough. That's really dope. All that was narrative shaping. They took all the facts that are available and twisted them in the same way that already they have been twisted in online communities, conspiracy theorists, QAnon, everybody who's been twisting this web for the entirety of this whole time. It has been just nothing but a spectacle, and I kind of even saw it as that even during the whole impeachment trials, because the Democrats ran and have run the most weak opposition. I don't really see anything standing in the way of Trump. I just see all of this as like a tug and pull show, as if like rule of law is battling, but we do have exceptions here in this nation. So it's if it is just the grandeur of the spectacle, we need to tear the whole thing down, because nothing's real and nothing will ever come of material wealth or prosperity for the working class and those below the elites. At this point, the production in the nation itself is all for their sake, and that's pretty much it. That's the class warfare report today. We got a little bit from the mind of a billionaire, discussing his first reactions to the transforming COVID pandemic. You are welcome to read the rest of that article on Bloomberg Business Week or Network. Ooh. It's just on Bloomberg.com. But this has at Bloomberg Business Week. Yep, so it was on Bloomberg Business Week, I think by Max Abelson or Abelson. Yeah, yep, he called a Wall Street billionaire to get his opinion and all of that yet. So if you want to check out more about that, go check out that article. And we went over Roger Stone, freshly out of not prison. Just, no more court battles for him. And the exoneration coming down from the president, exempting him from any actual accountability, even though he pled guilty to his crimes, which he says he did so that he could be found innocent, because people who plead not guilty are 98% more likely to be convicted. Strange. But yeah, it's dog shit. It's dog shit, and it has no public interest whatsoever. It has only the concerns of wealthy, powerful, influential people and how they can operate in this Game of Thrones. That's basically what I got from that Roger Stone interview, and that he's also free to go around and continue helping Trump with his reelection. He is no longer wrapped up in court battles, and now he can continue to help Trump in probably a distant manner, but in a manner nonetheless. We'll see, though. He hasn't actually announced anything. But thank you for joining me on the podcast. I'm going to have to cut the podcast here, and I'm going to get into at least Sam Harris. So if you're interested, go to YouTube, my YouTube channel, Poordom Rebel, or go to, or stay here on Twitch. It's live, or go to my Twitch. It'll be on the archive there. But I would say just go to YouTube because, Poordom Rebel. That's me. Bruh. YouTube. For the archives, but the podcast is unfortunately going to miss out on this next segment. So if you want to see it, go to YouTube or Twitch. But other than that, follow me on Twitter at working_Andrew, and join me again for another class warfare report and a working broadcast of a working class observation. I thank you, and I bid you adieu, podcast. All right, so to wrap up this, I want to get into Sam Harris, and then I'll probably have to do the next one the other night because time constraints. But let's Sam Harris talking to Ben Shapiro from pre-Corona times, but I had already did a little bit of Joe Rogan, and I did a little bit of Jordan Peterson. Very degrees in rhetoric, and beliefs. But I want to get into Sam Harris now, because I don't really listen to Sam Harris very much, and I haven't heard this before, but I don't agree with Sam Harris's beliefs, and I don't really agree with Ben Shapiro, so it's going to be great for me to absorb all of this and see how much cockamamie bullshit I can just pull out of it. And maybe it's none. Maybe I'll turn convinced and replace my flag with a blue line. I doubt it. That was a fucking joke. Let's get it.
What we should all be anchored to is a good faith, intellectually honest, non-smear merchant approach to analyzing what we think we know and why we think we know it. And those principles of rationality
that makes me look like a dick right now.
Empirical engagement with reality simply are not susceptible to an identity or even a political interpretation. I mean, this is why reason is the only thing that scales. I mean, if I have a good enough argument based on clear enough evidence, it should persuade you if you are being reasonable, no matter what your background, no matter who your parents were, no matter how you were mistreated or not as a child. If we build a reasonable robot, it should be persuaded by the right arguments and the right data. So rationality is the mode of argument where it doesn't depend who you are in order to reach the right answer.
What do you think that the United States?
I feel like that in itself may be a false statement, because people can rationalize themselves into Ben Shapiro's position while I've rationalized myself into my position, which we could argue are opposing positions. So what do we do from there? Because are we just going to ration each other into our own positions, or are we supposed to rationalize into a more moderate position? Is anybody actually right in any of these situations, or of all of these just possibilities? Or are we all really focused on the same outcome, which is the maximum decrease in human suffering, or the maximum of human happiness? What is that specific goal? I would argue the planet and the species has none, and that's why we tend to rationalize ourselves into these very different positions, and moderates seem to find a way to kind of try and grift everybody into doing what they want to do. Let's see where the rest of this goes.
States is going, because obviously we've seen the rise of your audience is enormous. You have a huge audience. I think a lot of folks, you mentioned Joe Rogan has an enormous audience. Jordan Peterson.
Ben Shapiro loves talking about how big your audiences are.
Obviously has a very big audience. A lot of these people have a very big audience. Do you think that the rise of these new conversations are you optimistic or are you pessimistic? Do you think that these new conversations are going to turn into a new sort of brand of politics that ends up saving the country, or are you pessimistic and you think that the identity politics machines that are now operating at seemingly full blast on all sides, do you think that those end up winning the day for the moment?
I don't know. Yeah, I really just, the future is a big question mark for me. And because the present is fundamentally surprising to me. I didn't think we would get Trump. There's almost nothing, and getting Trump, I didn't think we would get the kind of reaction we see to Trump. I mean, I could have predicted the reaction on the left, but it just amazes me every day that he is as untouchable based on his own missteps and gaffes and crazy utterances. I mean, just the fact that nothing sticks to him, it surprises me every day. So I don't quite know how we got here. I think I think you and I will be fine, right? I'm very optimistic about our having conversations like this. And
I thought he was talking in a class aspect that, like, through all of this, him and Ben Shapiro are going to be fine because their class interests align, so like they can discuss Sam Harris's liberal position and Ben Shapiro's conservative position. They'll be safe. They'll be fine. But again, they're worried about the moral fabric, which seems to always have to do more with the people on the bottom.
And this channel and media be having a kind of a durable interest for people, but whether it will affect any real political change in the near term, I don't know, because I see the left is fully capable of playing a what should be a fairly good hand so badly as to just amplify white populism and Trumpism for well beyond Trump's next 4 years. I just think it's there's no mistake.
Because they are the worst opposition
party.
party.
Incapable of it at this moment. And I'm as you point out, or as we'll discover, I'm on the left on virtually every relevant question, except the ones we've been talking about, which is the virtues of identity politics and victimology. Rationality, and I think I might have said this to you on stage at our event. Rationality is not the successful moments of reasoning are not examples where freedom of will is even tempting to ascribe. I mean, so it's if I give you an argument, if you strongly believe one thing, and I give you an argument that persuades you, that just knocks down the row of dominoes in your mind, that leads you to think.
Right. No, I understand your argument, which is that it's a naturalistic response to a reasonable argument. And you don't have any control over that.
But you don't have any control over any moment where you finally see the light. So where I give you a chain of reasoning and it works, that's a moment where you are changed by something extrinsic to your own volition. Right?
So my basic response to that is yes and no, because you see people who clearly resist the impact of a reasonable argument on themselves.
But the resistance is what it is to be unreasonable or to be under the sway of wishful thinking or confirmation.
Right, but the bottom line is that from my perspective, that is somebody, if the idea is that reason is basically just eliciting a particular response, then people have the capacity to override their ability to listen to reason.
So if you're going to ascribe that to free will, that's a different thing to ascribe. But that, again, I wouldn't. You don't need free will to explain that. But that is, take the reasoning piece. If I give you the quintessential moment of it, I give you a column of numbers to add up.
Right.
You have 0 degrees of freedom if you're going to actually be doing arithmetic.
So then the final question here, because we're going to have you in for like a 4-hour session here and just schmooze. But is the argument in favor of reason a moral reason is good argument, or is the argument a utilitarian reason is useful argument, or is it both? Because I can imagine a lot of ways to convince people of things that don't involve me making arguments to them and that historically have been used to great success with horrible, horrific human carnage, obviously.
Well, you're not necessarily convincing them in that case. You're just
forcing them, right? Yeah, that's right. Although I would say that you can indoctrinate fully millions of people into you would think this too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that it's possible to indoctrinate people, not.
So yeah, it's not forcing them. It's actually just exploitating an already present feeling. This all kind of leapt into a very abstract place where you can't really disseminate any argument whatsoever that they're making.
If I give you ascribe that to free will, that's a different thing to ascribe. But that, again, I wouldn't. You don't need free will to explain that. But that is.
Yeah, I don't understand, because he's still arguing that same point as the beginning of this fucking video, or I guess the beginning of his segment, is that if you use reason and rationality, everybody should reach to the same conclusion. But unfortunately, reason and rationality can lead into multiple interpretations of information and data. So there isn't one singular vision of set facts. It's facts are the immutable object, but the subjective context, which is very human and Western in a lot of ways, when I'm speaking from my position, and most likely Sam Harris's and Ben Shapiro's. Yeah, you're having a very closed off view of what you think rationality should get people towards. But, I've just been able to see through our Congress and through this kind of conversation that rationality can bring you to two different positions completely. Even though Sam Harris's liberalism is very conservative.
Take the reasoning piece. If I give you the quintessential moment of it, I give you a column of numbers to add up.
Right.
You have 0 degrees of freedom if you're going to actually be doing arithmetic.
So then the final question here, because we're going to have you in for like a 4-hour session here and just schmooze. But is the argument in favor of reason a moral reason is good argument, or is the argument a utilitarian reason is useful argument, or
a moral
is it both?
Reason isn't a good argument? None of that made sense to me. So I'm surprised that Sam Harris can just answer this question.
I can imagine a lot of ways to convince people of things that don't involve me making arguments to them and that historically have been used to great success with horrible, horrific human carnage, obviously.
Well, you're not necessarily convincing them in that case. You're just
forcing them,
forcing them.
Yeah, that's right. Although I would say that you can indoctrinate fully millions of people into, you would think this too, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
that it's possible to indoctrinate people not using reason into fully formed belief systems.
No. I mean, you're using reasoning to exploit the feeling, right? So in order for Hitler to convince people that eliminating or being rid of the Jew was in their best interest, was to reason with them, to rationalize that fear. And that's what propaganda does in a lot of ways, is it rationalizes or it reasons political positions, political movements, political thought, ideology, religion, what have you. It can do a lot of those. So, yeah, he's kind of on the nail about indoctrination, but he's somehow eliminating that reason and rationality are not part of those. Now, I'm going to say that racism is an irrational response to fear and paranoia, but it doesn't mean that people don't rationalize themselves to racism. Like, that's actually what a lot of these ethno-state people and the neo-Nazis and all of these fascists who are openly fascist and arguing for their positions, that's kind of what they tend to lean into. And they rationalize people into their positions by taking the context of certain studies or certain data points or certain biology facts and morphing that, the fact in rationalizing it with morphing, you can interchange the two, reasoning that into their position. So it's fascinating that Ben here is trying to extrapolate reason from people following Hitler as if they didn't have a rationality that led them there, even though it may seem like an unreasonable or irrational or illogical response to a situation. It was rationalized and it was reasoned. Like when Trump says that we have to have stronger border security because there's rapists, child smugglers, drug dealers, that's a way of rationalizing the situation. Now, it's not the correct way to rationalize the situation. It's more like, well, how would we be able to create an environment for them to stay home rather than just kicking them out of here or holding them for detention and stuff like that. But what I'm trying to say is that Ben's trying to say that people are just kind of thrown completely into their emotions without reason, but the person who threw them in there used reasoning to do it, is what I'm trying to say, which I don't know if it came out clear.
Yeah.
So when you make the argument for reason, are you saying that reason is morally better? And if so, why is reason morally better than, for example, the appeal of passion, which has obviously motivated billions of people over time?
Right. Well, I don't think they're as separable as many people think. I think you can't reason, and there's neurological evidence to back this up. And Antonio Damasio did this work decades ago, where if you have certain neurological injuries in the orbital medial prefrontal cortex, you can't be moved by the products of your, quote, reasoning. Because, reason has to be anchored to emotion in a very direct way. And you can actually feel this in yourself. So if I say something that starts to sound like bull to you, right, that feeling of doubt, the feeling that you have detected errors in my chain of reasoning, that feels like something. That is an emotion, right? And if you couldn't feel that, if it was all just cold and calculating and just...
That's why sociopaths, can't reason their way to virtually anything.
Well, they can.
Reverse can reason their way to everything.
Ben can't decide what position to take on sociopaths, whether they're very reasonable or very unreasonable, very rational or very irrational. I'm not sure. Where does sociopaths fit? But it's very fascinating, this side of the argument here. Let me see. Let me go back.
It was all just cold and calculating and just...
So, what I noticed here, though, is that it kind of made me think the way that he brought up, you start feeling doubt. And then you kind of get this causality argument, of whether, the doubt... Did you reason yourself into feeling doubt, or did you start feeling doubt and started to reason why you felt that way? Which way did it come? Which way did it go? That actually kind of sparked me a little bit. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do like that Sam Harris said that reason and certain emotions are inseparable, and that maybe because reasoning is a tool within itself and not necessarily anything like other emotions.
That's why sociopaths, can't reason their way to virtually anything.
Well, they can.
Reverse can reason their way to everything.
They can reason fine. Unfortunately, they just don't care about other people's experience. So they're very they're very manipulative in ways that you and I wouldn't.
But reason itself doesn't arrive at a moral answer in any case.
So for me, reason is the only thing that, again, as we talked about at the top of this, it's the only thing that takes us out of who we are and scales to some universal point of view. You're not reasoning. If you're actually reasoning, what you're arriving at is not just true for you, it's true for anyone who could be in, it's true from essentially above on any given topic.
That's what he's trying to convince Ben Shapiro is that if you actually reason and rationalize your position, you will come to the conclusion that is correct. But Sam Harris says he's a liberal. So he ended up on a different position than Ben Shapiro when they rationalize or reason their political stances. So it's not true, because one of them must be wrong. And so far he hasn't been willing to admit who, but we have to assume that he's not going to take a position and call himself wrong. Is he? That's like a Dave Rubin approach where you start out as a liberal and then just hit hard conservative. But maybe that's the thing about the intellectual dark web, is that they're a lot more closer and intertwined than is seen on the surface. But I'm just taking it off the surface level and theorizing on what their personal relationships could be. But they again, I feel like class interests can break ideological barriers and make people pretty amicable to living with each other.
But it does offer the view from above, or the view from any possible perspective, or at least it takes into account the effect of perspective. So it's like if again, reason is and scientific rationality generally is the thing that explains why, if you're colorblind, you don't see colors the way I do, right? And that's it. But it's not that we can't get at what's actually real. We can, because we can explain divergences of opinion. And otherwise you just have those divergences.
Christina Hoff Sommers has spent her career defending classic first-wave feminism and critiquing.
I have not even heard of Christina. That's pretty cool. I'm going to get like a brand new perspective here. Sam Harris's was pretty short. Then we get into somebody else that I'm not really too familiar with at the very end there. So let's see. How long is hers? I have time constraints, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm going to have to get into hers tomorrow. It seems like it's going to be at least 10 minutes long, and if I have to disseminate a conversation that's 10 minutes long, it's easily going to be 20 minutes long. So I'm just going to have to leave it with Sam Harris, is that, like, I do think reasoning is a great way to, is a great act before the act, right? But I don't think that it's going to get the necessary outcome that he wants, because it is certain biases that we're built with that tends to kind of take our reasoning and the facts in a different direction than most people may anticipate. But I can't really extrapolate on that further, because I feel like I already kind of went in circles a bit when I interrupted them in between. But it's pretty obvious that we can use reasoning and rationality to reach different conclusions. It's just what exactly is the goal, and that's what actually separates liberals and conservatives, not necessarily so much as the view as much as the goal. Yeah. I would have to take a lot of time to go over how that works on issues, because it always sounds like that they have different reasoning, but everybody always says that there's the same problems for the same things, but they rationalize their I guess it really does in some cases rationalize. They do see the problem in a different way, like the mass incarceration rate. Most people on the far left want to abolish the prison system as we know it so that we can replace something that's more reformative, while a conservative would just want to be able to fund their prisons better so that they can reach a higher capacity. They're not concerned with reform as much as incarceration itself. And also, with a for-profit system, then you incentivize recidivism and also retainment and like holding on to prisoners. Where with like a reformation system, you are focusing on trying to get prisoners reformed and actual contributors to society, if we're going to talk in terms of productivity, which is going to be the world we're living in for a while. But yeah, you reasoning and rationality is not going to lead people to the correct position all the time, because the correct position is actually on the outcome you're trying to reach, and that has to deal with the culture and society that you live in. But overall, I didn't really hear anything that was that hateful or disdainful or like the Sam Harris stuff that I've heard. He does have some very gross eugenics and identitary politics so far that I've heard. But with his reasoning argument, I don't agree with him, but it wasn't poisonous. I think it was actually just good to think about. So, yeah, I don't know if he was trying to convince anybody on Shapiro's show or trying to convince Ben Shapiro, but it's fascinating that his overall message in that clip was that he thinks that reasoning and rationalization is going to lead people to the correct positions. And I think Ben Burgess would agree, the author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. I think he would agree with that statement. But, again, it's the outcomes that you intend. I think that ends up changing the rationalization and the reasoning of facts. And, yeah. Yep. But that's going to be it for the broadcast stream and the rest of the YouTube. I'm going to have to get more into the intellectual dark web part 3 tomorrow. I kind of like this. I wish I could end like each video with just like clips of really smart people, me trying to understand what the fuck they're saying, because I'm really dumb people. But I want to thank you for joining me if you're here. If you're not, I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you are here, I hope you have a better day than those who aren't here. I have been your host, Andrew of Poordom. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew of Poordom. I forgot I changed my... Man, I said the wrong thing for the podcast, but fuck it. I am a sloppy dude. I've been doing this very hastily, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow. Thank you for joining me, and have a beautiful, beautiful